Laura Heywood. Lin-Manuel Miranda, you are the man of the moment, the man of the hour, the man of the year.
Thank you. I remember being Conrad Birdie, and all the girls in the grade had to faint when I sang. And I said, I'm doing this for the rest of my life.
Maybe you've heard of him, NFL superstar, Hall of Famer Joe Montana.
The game is just so much fun. I always say I wish people could go out on the field one Sunday afternoon and play the game. And win or lose, just to get that feeling of what it's like out there. Because there's nothing like it, and nothing like it around.
Tony Robbins.
I just started to cry. And I realized in that moment, this happened because I did what was right. I didn't do things for brownie points. I didn't do it for positioning. My heart knew it was right, and I did it. And I was rewarded. It's like the money showed up.
But how is that different from me wanting to give my last paycheck to the Broadway show I want to invest in?
It's not different than that. If you did that once, it would be good. If you do it regularly, you're in trouble.
Fair enough.
Todrick called.
Todrick, I love you.
Thank you. You're so sweet. I think we're going to be best friends.
I agree.
I'm following you back on Instagram and Twitter right now, and it's going to be a BFF situation. You have no choice.
Welcome, Tori Amos.
Hi, Laura. What's going on in the world, we have to respond to that and work together every night, collaboratively. I think that's essential because it's important that we're sharing, yes, our stories, but we're also planting seeds.
Liza Koshy. Hello. You are both on screen and off, really setting an incredible example for the young people of today. And it's really been an honor to spend this time with you today, Liza.
I'm in love with you.
Let's get married.
Let's go.
On today's show, Laura Heywood interviews
Ms. Tonya Pinkins.
Hey.
Welcome to the studio, Tonya. I'm so thrilled to have you.
I am so thrilled to be in your queendom.
Isn't it
Laura,
beautiful?
it's fabulous.
So people have been asking me for many years why I haven't been doing a podcast. And I said, I'm just waiting for the right partnership. And here we are at DNR Studios. These are some former colleagues of mine from a previous life, and they built this place.
It's fabulous.
Thank you. We are also going to be joined shortly by some of your colleagues, but I've written an official intro for you that I'd like to read. Welcome to Laura Heywood Interviews. I'm Laura Heywood. Today, my guest is one of my favorite performers and one of the people I most admire on the planet, Miss Tonya Pinkins. Not only is she an actress of the highest caliber, winning the Tony Award for Jelly's Last Jam and being nominated for 2 more, she's also a take no bullshit advocate for everything she believes in, and she puts her money where her mouth is. Today, we're going to talk about her latest project, a raw, gorgeous collection of 10-minute plays called Truth and Reconciliation of Womyn. That's Women spelled with a Y, which will be performed across 3 nights at the Heal Me 2 Festival, taking place through April 24th. In addition to being one of the playwrights, Tonya also conceived of the project and dramaturged all the plays and has directed at least one, leading the artists to pursue plots that include healing specifically. We'll also be joined by writer-performer Jasmine McLeish and actor Mary Archibold, both of whom are working with Tonya on the project, which I'm so excited about, thrilled for, and challenged by. It makes me want to write my own aspirational healing stories.
Oh, I'm welcoming plays. I'm always open to more plays.
Of all the work you've done in your life, Tonya Pinkins, this has got to be amongst the most important. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having us. This is the most exciting thing I've done in a really long time. I'm really committed to helping women heal their instinct injury and rebuilding the sacred feminine energy and power. And this is the way I want to do it. We have so much power, and we keep sort of just conceding it. We're the majority on the planet. We should be running the world.
Why women with Y?
Why women with Y?
Why the Y? WOMYN. Because it doesn't include the word men?
Well, yes, it doesn't. But then I thought, but the Y is like the Y chromosome. So, so sometimes I play with an I that looks like the woman sign, with that. Mm-hmm. So I'm still struggling with what I want it to be spelled. But right, they come from us. So if we could have a word that didn't have them in it or that had them inside of us, that would be the ideal word. So right now it's Y.
Got it. There's a lot of information about this project on Facebook. Yes. There's both a page you can like and there's an event page.
Yes, because we are March 31st at 7 p.m. at the IRT Theaters at 154 Christopher, and April 7th and April 14th, and there are different plays every night.
And so each play is 10 minutes long. You're doing 4 or 5 each?
There are 5 plays each night, so there are 15 plays and 2 songs. And it's a really feel-good evening because it's about how good it feels when you make peace with somebody. Nobody likes to be carrying around burden and being in conflict. And so every one of these plays shows you an awkward situation, and it shows you how they make it right.
Yeah, and they are really, a lot of them are based in not just personal truths, but like historical truths.
Yes.
What can you tell us about some of the plays themselves? And we'll get into this a little bit more when Mary and Jasmine arrive.
Well, one of my favorites is by Christine Imre. It's called The Grandmothers, and it's a Japanese woman who's visiting her granddaughter in San Francisco. And her granddaughter is so excited to show her mother this statue that she's been working on as a social justice activist. And her grandmother's like, this comfort woman statue, these women, these prostitutes, how dare you denigrate Japan? We lost the war. You're denigrating your grandfather. And these, this grandmother and granddaughter get into it. And then they fight, and the granddaughter leaves her grandmother there, and the statue comes alive. And she learns the stories of these women who were kidnapped from their homes, who were forced to have babies and kill their babies. And she has this epiphany of like, nobody told us this story. I didn't know this about you. I'm sorry, and I want to tell the story to the world as well. And so there's this joining together around something that is a wound for both sets of women, and them coming together to say, yeah, let's work this out and make sure everybody's story is told. That's just one of many. Tierra de las Flores is a really interesting one because there's a woman who's been abused by her husband, and then a woman of a different class, which we don't like to talk about class in America, but this is in San Augustine, Florida, and they sort of get into an argument about class, but really the woman who is conceived or perceived of as a lower class woman is there to offer her assistance to this more upper class woman in the way that women take care of men who are problems for them. They're just little herbs from the garden that make all your problems go away.
Yeah, that one really moved me, I think, especially because they are in St. Augustine, and the woman of the upper class learned something about St. Augustine himself that she didn't know before, in a way that reminded them both, I think, of how connected all people of this earth are, and something especially about the women.
Yes.
I think that you wrote a beautiful piece as an introduction to the script that you sent over to me. I obviously haven't seen any of the shows yet because they haven't been produced yet. They haven't been put on yet, but I did get to read them. And I'm curious about the intro you wrote, where you talked about guiding the playwrights into the reconciliation part. First, I want to know, I'd love for you to sort of share some of that with the listening audience, and I'd also love for you to let me know, is that going to be available as part of a program or something else that's given to the people in the audience so they understand that process?
So, we're so Western modeled towards the conflict. And so every playwright was able to write the conflict very easily. And I was like, great. Now, you've, told off this person who you perceive as having harmed you. Now I need to hear from them. Like, what is their thought about how they harmed you or why they harmed you or if they thought they harmed you? And now how are they going to make right by you in a way that satisfies you? And I'm not policing that. What would they need to do to make it right for you? So one of them, Aditi Natasha Kinney, wrote a piece called Grace Us With Your Presence, which is a Hindu woman and a Caucasian woman and their alter egos talking. And there's a politeness. And at the end of the play, the Caucasian woman was crying. And I said, Aditi, would it really satisfy you if she cried? And she was like, no, but that, I thought that would be right. And I was like, well, make it what you want it to be. And took those tears out and gave it a more fulfilling for her ending rather than what we see in a traditional way in, the average Western piece. So the way we work with it with an audience is very interactive. The audience is given a questionnaire at the beginning of the evening.
Oh, wow.
And they are asked if they owe anybody amends, to rate that on a 1 to 5. And does anyone owe them amends, rating that on a 1 to 5? And how likely is it that either of you are going to make amends with each other, rated on a 1 to 5? and then they watch 5 plays where people figure out how to make the amends, and at the end they're given the questionnaire again. You know, do you owe amends? Are you owed amends? How likely are you to be able to make those amends? And at each of these evenings, I have a psychologist, Jim Andrelis, Anath Garber, and we have 3 psychologists who will be at each of the evenings conducting a talk back with people about ways to do this in your life. Because to me, the most important part is that the theater began to model the world we want to see.
Yeah.
You know, we can show people conflicts, but showing them resolutions, and that making resolutions can actually be really uplifting, really a powerful gift to yourself and to the other person.
So this is not just about the plays. This is about changing the face of the world.
Yeah, yeah.
That's so remarkable. And I also want to say, I think that when I went into this, I was picturing a lot of like hugging and I see the error of my ways. We were both right. Come over here. Like sort of kumbaya moments at the end of these plays. And that's not what reconciliation looks like in real life or in these plays. A lot of times it's about coexisting. It's about taking a breath before you contradict someone. And I appreciated that it wasn't just a sort of hearts and flowers kind of finding peace.
Right. No, sometimes people feel that the person has some consequences that they have to. In Aditya Shenoy's play, it's a dean who is the first woman dean at a university. And this student is now a very affluent person who wants to make a large donation to her university. And the condition she sets is because this dean turned a blind eye to a sexual relationship with the teacher, she's got to step down to show that there are consequences for not acting as well. And that is the reconciliation that she wanted.
There's truth in the reconciliation, in addition to the truth of the conflict.
Yes.
So good for you for putting this together. Is this related to, or did it come out of the interviews that you conducted, the Me Too?
The Heal Me Too interviews that I did with the Shift Network.
Yeah.
I think that, I feel like all of my life kind of connects. Those interviews were definitely inspired by being an early involved in the Time's Up Now movement. And so that sort of inspired who I wanted to interview and what I wanted to ask when I did the Shift Network Heal Me Too dialogues or Me Too dialogues. And all of that kind of goes together. Yeah. Thinking about, okay, we know there's sexual violence. People are now not feeling ashamed to speak up about it, but what actually can we do to just eliminate it or diminish it in the world? So that's what the Me Too dialogues were about. What are our actions we can take to make this less? We're not going to eliminate anything, but what can we do?
How did you find the playwrights that are involved in this project?
I sent an email out to playwrights who I personally knew or had worked with or whose work I had seen. And then we did readings at Deepak Home Base, and a woman came up to me and said, "Where's the Hindu story?" I said, "Do you want to write it?"
What a great answer.
So I, in trying
did
to find...
she?
She did.
That's amazing.
She wrote it. One of my assistants, Jasmine McLeish, is here, and she was telling me something in her life about the challenge of being a biracial woman, that she is both British and I think Caribbean. What you can speak?
Yep.
Oh, we can.
We're bringing in
Right,
Jasmine
and so
and Mary.
she
Welcome
was-
to you both.
Right, she was telling me her story, and I was like, "Can you write it? Write the story." So this is going to be her debut as a playwright. And she's also going to act in her play. You can tell us about your play.
Yeah, that's exactly kind of how it happened. We were working on a separate play together, and while we were working on that, I was working on Truth and Reconciliation. I was reading through all these different plays we were getting in, and she asked me, what are we missing? And I knew that Tonya wanted to speak to all ages and all different crowds, especially like the younger community, especially like my community. And I told her that I think that if you want to reach out to these people, we need some of those influences, some of the stories that they're dealing with.
They being
the younger community, my
College
community,
age.
college age, 21, 18, because we're hoping to get it out there as well. We want it to be for everybody.
Sure.
And that's exactly kind of what she said to me. She was like, oh, do you have something to say? And I was like, yes. And she was like, okay, great. Can you write it? And I was like, oh, man.
Like I said before, this is a no bullshit woman.
Yeah, I was like, oh, what have I done?
You want to make a difference? Start making a difference.
It really was. And she was like, write it. And I thought, I was like, okay. I went home and I like brainstormed and I saw her the next day and she goes, okay, what you got for me? And I was like, oh, we're starting right now. Okay. And I kind of went, like she said, this is my debut as a writer. And I kind of just went into, okay, what do I have to say? What haven't I heard? What is my story that I don't see represented? And it is being of a mixed race. I am white and black, and the struggle I have of being called one thing, identifying myself as one thing, but being called other things by other people, and what other people think I am, and put what they believe my identity is, that's it. And I went through I was thinking about when I was trying to apply for college and when I was trying to take that leap into like adulthood and going on my own and my experiences. So I wrote a play called Other, and it's about this young woman applying for college, and she got into her dream school, and she's very, very smart, very talented, and she meets with the dean, who then tells her that she must give up, she must lose her scholarship, because even though this young woman, Rebecca, thinks that she is African American, the others do not. And because of her skin color and what they presume African American must look like and act like, and what they think African American is, she cannot be, because it's what she looks like and how she acts.
I'm going to jump in because her play is has a kind of a Pulp Fiction feeling in that you see the play, it happens twice. And so this same woman goes in to meet a dean, and one time she goes in and she's not white enough. And so she's going to lose her scholarship because she's not white enough, even though her mother is a white woman. Right. Then the next time she comes back to the same dean, she's not black enough to be African American for the African American scholarship. And so you have this one dean wrestling with this issue on two sides, and at the end we sort of think she's going to go a certain way, but she has her own epiphany about the fact that I should let this person identify themselves rather than using some rules that we've got in a book about how people get identified.
Exactly, and I think that's very important in this day and age. We always assume, especially with skin color, how they talk or where they raise and their culture and their money, then we automatically put them in a box and this is what you are, instead of openly let that person decide who they are.
And certainly right at this moment, the college admissions process in particular is very timely. So good on you for getting that out there right at this moment.
Yeah. And then Mary's here with me, who is like, Mary can do anything. She's just one of the most extraordinary actresses I've ever worked with, and she's done all of the plays in one form or another. Anytime there's a play, I'm like, let me give it to Mary. Mary will show me how it works.
Mary, can you give us a little bit of your background for people who aren't familiar so we can get to know you a little bit?
Sure. Well, my full name is Mary Teresa Elizabeth Archibold, but really I'm from Long Island.
I love that you said it sort of the way that I imagine Mary from The Secret Garden says her name.
Right? My white knight. Okay, anyway, no, I went to school in the Midwest. I went to Michigan, and then I lived in Chicago, where I did improv for quite some time. As well as dancing professionally in concert dance companies and doing musical theater. Moved back home to New York and have been sort of a Jill of all trades.
Yeah, and we met at in 2014 doing the TBTB Festival. We weren't in a play together, but her work was just so fine that I, cast her in another play that I was doing, and she's been in a few things.
And we had a lot of laughs in that dressing room.
It seems like you guys have a lot of fun together, and this is heavy subject matter. The festival itself is Heal Me Too Fest, which, by nature of the way it's named and branded and the reason it came to be, has to do with a lot of trauma. So women coming together and not just supporting each other and holding each other, but also laughing together and challenging each other, I think is a really important element that sometimes gets lost in activism work like this.
There's a new book out that I started reading by Adrienne Marie Brown called Pleasure Activism.
Ooh.
Oh, and I love it. And yesterday I was listening to this essay read by Audre Lorde about how women's power is so rooted in our erotic, impulses and how any oppressing force must come in and destroy power sources. And so controlling the feminine body, controlling the feminine sensuality and the erotic within us is a way they contain us and suppress us. And so I love this idea of reconnecting with our sensuous eroticness as a power. And one of the things I say to the actresses is, you've got to make reconciliation delicious and sexy. As hard as you guys fight in these plays, when you reconcile, it's got to feel delicious, because that's the invitation to the audience.
What a beautiful adjective. Okay. I've got a segment on the show that I call Yes and, which you, Mary, and your improv background,
I've heard that phrase
you
a few
will
times.
you will understand. This is about the idea that there's a lot that goes in social media and branding and in the short playbill bio that becomes the story that the public knows. But I think that there are things within us that get lost in that branding. And so that's where this came from.
Yes, and. 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 Yes, and.
So I know I'm putting you on the spot a little bit by asking you your yes and. With Tonya, I've done a little bit of research, and we've known each other a long time. First of all, here's what we do know, what I think the average Tonya Pinkins fan knows. You've won basically every possible theater award. You've been on all of the big TV shows, Gotham 24, Fear the Walking Dead, All My Children, Scandal. You're very known for your integrity and for standing up for what you believe in. You've written a book called Get Over Yourself, How to Drop the Drama and Claim the Life That You Deserve. Here's what I didn't know until my research for this. You're a Fulbright scholar. That is an incredible academic achievement. What?
Yeah.
And that's wait, do you not want to talk about it? I feel like you should be yelling it from the rooftops.
Gosh, yeah, I'm a Fulbright. Yeah, I guess they call us a Fulbright specialist. I'm a Fulbright specialist, which means that for a 3-year period of time, I can go anywhere in the world and teach. And I was supposed to go to Russia, actually, in a week. And that's not going to happen. So that's why I was a little like,
Oh.
I was supposed to go to Russia, so I'm not. So now I'm looking to see if I can go to either Japan or Brazil. And then someone last night was like, you should come to Melbourne. So for the next 3 years, I get to pick a place and go, and Fulbright will send me there to teach.
That's amazing. Is that going to be related to the work you're doing now with Women in Reconciliation, or is it totally unrelated?
It's totally unrelated. It's whatever the need is at the university. Like I've taught in Beirut in Lebanon before. And so I always like going into different cultures and asking, hard questions. When I was in Beirut, I kind of got in trouble because I was like, I asked my students there to write a monologue to someone who thought of them as people who didn't value life and who thought of them as terrorists. And somehow in the translation, they thought that I was saying that's what I thought of them as. And so we had to work that out in the room, and then they told some really amazing stories.
Wow.
So it's always challenging when you're in another culture, in another country, and even if you share English as a language, communicating is challenging. And that's also why Truth and Reconciliation of Women is so important to me, because we have Hapa women, Indigenous women, Filipino, Japanese. And I think for me, some of these women, I didn't have them in my community. So it's my hope that the 27 women that I've assembled for this will also increase the women and the different cultures and the communications they have. Because I feel like once we as women make peace with each other, then there's no more dividing and conquering us, and we will take our place on the throne.
Love it. I love that. The first thing you said to me when you came in, you were like, I'm so happy to be in your queendom. I need to start claiming every room I'm in as my queendom.
Exactly.
So for Mary and Jasmine, I'm just getting to know you. I've known Tonya a long time, and of course her work has been very high profile. Do you feel like there are things that you are best known for and things that you wish you were better known for?
What a question.
Here's the reason that this segment came to be while you're thinking about it. I have been known in the New York community as Broadway Girl, which is what I named my anonymous alter ego on the internet 10 years ago. I was working as a radio host in sports and men's media. Wow. I didn't do anything close to Broadway except for geographically. And I was going to the theater all the time, and because I had moved here to work for a men's magazine, most of the people that I worked with were really into this, as we called it at the time, locker room culture. And you might even consider it something close to the opposite of Broadway, if you can imagine. So because of the timing of when I moved, who I knew, and the fact that Twitter had just been invented, I just, on a whim, created this thing I called Broadway Girl, which was just a way of me recording my own adventures going to shows. It was really like a microblog, which is what Twitter called itself when it launched. One sentence at a time, what I'd seen, who I was running into, the performers I admired the most. Well, it turned out social media exploded. Broadway Girl became a phenomenon. Wow. The industry started saying, who is this secret insider? When I wasn't really an insider at all. I just lived in Hell's Kitchen and got a lot of tickets to shows through my media job. And I ultimately got invited to do a TED Talk revealing my identity as the.
Oh my God!
Did you not know this?
I did not know any of this.
Yeah, so this is how Broadway Girl began. And once I put myself in front of the camera and on a stage and said, "I'm Laura Heywood and I'm Broadway Girl," suddenly it was like all of my professional history had gone away. Oh. And I started getting declined for jobs doing things that I had 10 years of experience doing, because they said, well, why would we hire Broadway Girl to do a sports thing? And I was like, no, Broadway Girl's my side gig. And so now the reason that I called this show, and I started it just a few weeks ago, I called it Laura Heywood Interviews instead of the Broadway Girl NYC show, is because I want the opportunity to show people the entire me, the full spectrum of what I do.
You want to claim all of it.
And look, I'm not going a single step away from Broadway. I love it. I will always love it. But it's like one slice of a pizza that people expected to have all the toppings on it.
Exactly. I feel like that there's always this external energy that wants to diminish us so that it's comfortable for whomever that is. You're the this. I even had some casting directors say to me once, Tonya, I just don't think of you for anything because you can do everything.
Oh my gosh, like that's sort of the biggest and the worst compliment ever.
Right, but they were genuinely that. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to just keep doing everything and get what I get rather than you think of me as the judge. And when judges come up, I'm a judge. I was like, that is a risk I'm willing to take.
My guest earlier this week was Ty Defoe, who's a non-binary actor. He uses he, him pronouns, but he's of an indigenous background. And his sexual orientation is actually, or his gender identity is something called two-spirit. That basically means that, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he's flexible. He goes, he is literally non-binary. And we started talking about, of all things, the neurology of categorization and the idea that human beings in caveman days started by saying, like, they survived because they knew, is it poisonous or is it edible? Right. And then it became, is it friend or is it foe? And we really are, I believe, and of course I'm not a neurologist, I believe that we get comfortable with the idea of associating people in certain ways because that feels safe to our animal brain. But it can be really hard for an actor who wants to be seen for a lot of different roles, or a broadcaster who wants to be, acknowledged for all of her background and skills, or any number of other cases.
On the yes and, I'm really into neurology and biochemistry of the brain. And when you talk about that, one of the things they know about the way our brains work is we have these sort of, they say two brains for, shorthand, but the instinctive thing, our instinctive likes will also often lead us astray. That part of our brain that sort of second guesses, which is what we use for safety, will often lead us in error when there's a subtle decision that has to be made. And what they know is that a bit of cognitive stress will actually help us kick beyond that instinctive brain to make a better decision. So if there's a logical fallacy and they give you a question and it's easy to take this answer, if they make the the questions blurry so you can't read them, then suddenly that kick in instinctive answer, you can't go to it because you have to work a little hard to read and understand, and that will actually force you to make a more accurate decision. So that thing that we think of, our gut decision, can often lead us astray if the answer is complicated and subtle.
That is so fascinating. Neurology and evolutionary biology are also kind of my yes and passions outside of broadcasting and stuff. Aren't you doing a talk related to neurology as part of the Heal Me Too Festival?
We are. On Monday, there's a podcast at IRT Theater that is around neurology of healing. And one of my impetuses for this particular evening of plays is that we know that the brain shows us a prediction of life. It doesn't ever show us what is really there. It's like it goes through the files and goes, well, based on all these experiences we had, when you walk into this room, this is what should happen. And so I said, well, what if I start making theater that models some really great interactions between people who the traditional entertainment says these people are in conflict. Let me show you these people not in conflict, so that there are new files in people's brains, so that when they go out and they walk into a situation that is unfamiliar to them, their brain actually begins to be able to predict that this could go really well because they've seen it go really well, which is not what traditional entertainment does for us.
The idea of cause and effect, and the fact that sometimes they are actually the opposite of each other. Sometimes it's the effect you expect becomes the cause of what you think you see.
Yes.
I mean, I realize that sounded really convoluted.
No.
But the brain is such a crazy thing, and we could do an entire podcast just on that.
I mean, it's quantum physics, which says that what you are looking for, the observer alters reality. So if you're seeking this, that's what you'll find. And we forget about that when we're using these devices. You know, people who program social media say you and your friends want to go talking. The first thing that comes up is a bar. And then suddenly you're reading all about bars. And suddenly you were looking for a place to talk, but your choices are about bars and food and cocktails. And you have now been deterred onto another path that is totally different from the one you wanted because a choice was put before you that wasn't even what you were thinking about.
Not to mention the fact that the people who make the phones and everything on them that have basically made my career. I'm not trying to say anything bad about, or I shouldn't say, I'm not saying that social media is all bad, but they know about the brain so much more than we do, and how these hits of dopamine work, that if you put a little flashing light, or if you give
a notification.
A notification, you tell somebody that they'll keep their rating up if they respond to a message faster. I want to keep my rating up. That sounds good. Well, what does that rating do for you? Nothing. But that I wouldn't be surprised if every major online company and social media company has neurologists working and telling them basically how to make this stuff more addictive, in the same way that like cigarette companies used to manipulate, or still probably manipulate, the tobacco to make it more addicting.
Doing it younger and younger.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a 5 and a 7-year-old, and the amount of media that is stimulating them is shocking. And actually, my 7-year-old for Lent gave up screens.
Wow.
His choice?
His choice completely, which actually I was sort of like, oh boy, there are times I can really use you to be on a screen. But
I'm just going to run around the house like a mad woman, Mom. A madman.
The funny thing is, we're about 15 days or so into Lent right now. His behavior has been fantastic. His creativity has skyrocketed. He comes home and he's like, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to make a book about this. And he is just creating and creating. And I'm realizing when you take away the stimulus, we become the stimulus.
The internal stimulus.
Right, because we are called to create. We are called to put stuff out into the world. And if you stop letting everything tell you how to create, what intrinsically comes out is so magical.
Wow.
Oh my gosh, that's such a...
Yeah, I was thinking when you're talking about neurologists, they don't need neurologists. The algorithms are doing it. Like, most people don't know that Amazon, that the retail is just 3% of their revenue.
I know they have Alexa, and then they have their streaming.
But the bulk of their revenue is data collection.
Oh my
It's
gosh.
data collection. That is what Amazon makes their money off of. Companies use them to store data. And so Amazon has algorithms, and the algorithms actually are predicting your behavior. So the reason Amazon can deliver same day for you is the algorithm has already told them what you're going to buy, and they have moved it right to a delivery spot for you because it's already predicted what you're going to buy.
Oh my gosh.
And they only need 6 choices that you've made to do those predictions.
I've heard so many crazy stories, and we should say, of course, like, we don't represent the views of the company, and we haven't reached out to Amazon for comment.
That's
and
true.
We're all speaking from our own points of view, just to get those disclaimers out of the way. I have heard some stuff about the fact that companies like this, and I don't know about Amazon or any other specific named company, but that sometimes with data collection, they can know, like, that you're sick or that you're pregnant before you do.
Wow.
Based on the algorithms that show what you've been buying,
Searching.
what you've been
Yes.
consuming, and how comparing that to other people who
in the past, well, Yuval Harari says they pretty much have already figured out how to hack the human brain, and that what they can actually chemically tell what your next decision is going to make. And he says it's going to change the face of criminology, because if they find out that you're chemically programmed to take an action or commit a crime, then this idea of motive being this intellectual thing, they will have to change everything.
wasn't there a movie? I feel like there have been so many movies about this, not just 1984, but
Minority Report.
Yeah,
you're thinking of
Minority
that.
Report is what I'm thinking of.
Yeah. But, there was a little scam going on in Minority Report. But, they're pretty much saying they're at that point.
I think maybe what we need is a series of plays called Truth and Reconciliation of Data.
Absolutely.
In fact, what about, listen, I'm not trying to say that Womyn is not a place to start and end, but I love the idea of Truth and Reconciliation ... being an ongoing forever series that
Agreed.
people can do on the micro or the macro. Truth and Reconciliation of the environment, Truth and Reconciliation of the workplace, Truth and Reconciliation of the, 7-year-old son and the mom who needs him to go on his iPad for a few minutes,
I agree. I think that's true. Absolutely. There's no place where it isn't appropriate.
There's a podcast that I love called Conversations with People Who Hate Me by a comedian who has turned into a very serious, podcaster and just one of the most sincere and beautiful souls. And this is not somebody I've ever met. This is not something that I'm related to in any way or getting paid for. But people started posting on his YouTube channel really nasty things. And he thought, well, what if I call them up and we try to find some middle ground? And I bet that when they said that, I should shoot myself in the face, they probably didn't really mean that. And they also probably didn't know that I would, or conceive of the fact that I would ever really read and
contemplate that.
Yeah. And so every episode is him having a conversation with someone with the most open, loving heart. And reading the plays from Truth and Reconciliation of Womyn reminded me of this podcast.
Wow.
Where it is about radically switching your perspective,
Yes.
even when it means putting yourself very vulnerably into the hands of someone who has hurt you actively or passively.
Yes. Yeah.
Because each play is dealing with so many different subjects that there's really something for everyone. Or even if there's not, you can put yourself or somebody else, or your mother or someone in that situation, and you automatically feel that vulnerability and sympathy. And it really teaches you about yourself and other women and but not even just women either, just
men
your
have
father.
been really moved
Oh yeah.
by this.
Amazing.
And been very vulnerable and open. We just did a reading at the Commons in Brooklyn, and one man, he got up and he wasn't there to see the show. He worked at the space.
Oh, really?
And he stayed and watched the show, and he said this was a forum for him to tell his mother's story about a really harsh thing that happened to her around having a baby, and a doctor doing what would have been called an abortion, but his understanding was that he chopped the baby up inside of the mother. And, this is a trauma that he is carrying. He is carrying his mother's trauma around this thing. And he felt like this is the first place where I've been able to talk to anyone about this thing that my mother went through. And so men were very, very moved by it. They were also moved by hearing women talk about introduce themselves down their matrilineal line and talk about where their people come from. And I feel we're all mutts. There's they say people on the African continent have more genetic diversity like of one tribe than any people from 2 different countries anywhere else on the in the world. Like the greatest genetic diversity still exists on the African continent. And the further we get away from Africa, the closer we get to each other genetically, even though we visibly look different. Like I have 2 sons who have the same father. One of them is very fair skinned, one is more brown. The one who's more brown actually has more of what you would call genetically Caucasian DNA, even though he visibly looks browner.
And you know this because of like 23andMe
Because
or
of
something?
Ancestry.com.
Yeah. Speaking of data collection, don't even get me started.
Right? Now they're using that for crimes.
Guess what I found out when I did 23andMe? I am like the whitest white person you can ever
Really?
find.
From where?
Yes. Mostly from England. My family actually on my dad's side goes back 7 generations in California alone. And my family, turns out, built the city of Berkeley on my dad's side.
Wow.
But all of the Heywoods and basically everyone they ever mated with came from England. And there's a little bit of Scotland and a little bit of French and a little bit of Eastern European, but I was like ready to find out about my Native American heritage, my African heritage. Like I was ready to be like, but no, I'm Whitey McWhiteson.
No,
Well,
I'm
everybody
with
has
ya.
some African
I'm with
American
ya.
stuff.
I am
though.
like so Irish. I mean,
Well, Mary Archibold.
I know. I'm half McNally. I married a Shay. I mean, like, but it's shocking because I really wonder if I go back into it. Like, I'm looking for it. I want something because it becomes comical where you're like, yeah, everyone's Irish and they married someone Irish. And I mean, I'm only 2nd generation American. On my dad's side and on my mom's side, you know, back from the potato famine, because as my dad said, her family gave up and they quit. They're quitters.
Wow.
I was like, or they were starving and went somewhere there was food. One or the other.
Sounds like maybe we need some truth and reconciliation of Irish heritage.
Right. Oh, they're good. Irish got stories. They're all full of secrets. But I always am amazed what you feel connected to. I think has so much to do with your DNA. And I do think you're called to certain work based on your genetic makeup. And I'm curious and hungry to find out if there's something that calls me to be a storyteller.
Well, the Irish are storytellers.
Irish are.
I've always felt drawn to the Celtic culture. And when I looked at my DNA, I am 14% Irish. And a woman, Tonya Pinkins. And a woman on Ancestry.com reached out to me and said, you share DNA with my mother and her first cousin. And she gave me all of the surnames and the counties in Virginia that her family had lived in. And, you know, people don't know that after the international slave trade was banned, Virginia was the place where they actually took blacks and began to breed them like animals in Virginia because slavery expanded in the Americas after the Revolutionary War. And Virginia was the place where they quote unquote made more slaves because they couldn't import them anymore. And so that's probably why I share ancestry with this Irish woman from Virginia.
Oh my gosh. The world and science are so crazy. And I simultaneously can't get enough. I want to dig in and learn as much. And then I hear things about people being bred like animals and it makes me want to throw up. And I go I just want to put my head in the sand.
Well, I learned that the word mother, that word, that's where it comes from. That's one of the things that they used to do. They used to make boys have sex with their mothers to produce more slaves.
And it's interesting that you said that you want to put your head in the sand and cover it up and
I don't let myself.
No, yeah, you don't let yourself. But it's with Tonya bringing out Truth and Reconciliation, it's really brought people to acknowledge where they are, where they come from, and who they are. And especially me writing my play, I had to go back into my heritage, and I have never done ancestry.com or the me one 23andMe. I've never
Neither
done
of whom
those.
sponsors the show and probably never will after this conversation.
So sorry, guys. But I had to go back and go back through my history and talk to my dad's side and my grandparents and figure out where I was from. And it was it was really heartbreaking finding out where I was from, but it made me, because people always talk about, which is in the show, how my last name is McLeish, and it sounds Scottish, and I was always very confused because like my mother is Irish, and I was like, do I have Scottish in me? I'm confused. Like, is it Irish, Scottish? Like, who am I? And then when I like sat down and like talked to my parents about it, because it's my dad's name, and my dad's Jamaican, and my grandparents are Jamaican, full Jamaican. I figured out that name was my slave owner's name, McLeish, and that hit me so hard when I was younger, and I was like, I hated the name, I didn't want the name, and it just was part of me, and it just really hit me until like recently I've like accepted who I am, accepted where I came from, and doing the show really accepted where I came from because I got to share that story, which it is in my play about how people make assumptions, like the dean, which is actually Mary. Yeah, Mary's my dean. Confronts that about me because she's trying to figure out where I'm from. And when people realize that my last name, because people ask me all the time, oh, it was like mother's name, what's going on? And I'm like, and when they realize it was a slave owner, they automatically turn another way and have a blind eye and get very awkward, and they just want to put their head in the sand and they just want to cover it up, and they don't want to talk about the situation at all. They want to pretend that never happened, which is like the opposite of what we want to do. We want to embrace it. And I'm like, this did happen, and this is part of me, and I've now decided I'm going to keep my name forever. I'm going to keep the name McLeish even if I get married. That is part of me. I want my kids to share that, and I would never have it any other way, because we just take it on and we use that name, and even though somebody else's, is now ours, and it's now mine, it's now my family's. And I feel like this show does this. It's like, embrace who you are. Are you Native American? Great. Are you Jamaican, African? Great. Are you this? Are you that? Fantastic. Like, embrace that. Like, that's so good.
And there were all so many things.
Oh my God.
I know.
We're
well,
mutts. We're
we
just
all
all
go
mutts.
back, we go back to when we
go back to one continent, Africa.
Oh yeah.
Everything can come off of that continent. Like,
and we
the
all go
things
back
are-
to being amoebas. Like, if you go back far enough, we all came.
Stardust.
I know, which that makes me like feel
Yes.
like I'm made of glitter,
Yes.
and I'm like, yes, stardust. And it feels so whimsical, but it's really science. Which I think is so cool. And the other thing, just to touch back on what you were saying, like putting one's head in the sand does not make the stuff any less true.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't let myself do it.
Yeah.
But it is, I can understand the impetus of people saying the past doesn't matter. Let's just look at what we've got going on right now. And like, I think I admire so much that you are owning that whole history and that whole part of yourself. And it sounds like you're doing truth and reconciliation of the self.
Yeah.
And
of your own ancestry.
yeah. Do you guys know about epigenetics? It sounds like pseudoscience, and maybe it is. I haven't studied enough to know, but it's basically the idea that you can like have genetic markers that turn on based on experiences that your ancestors had. And I am not a scientist. I like to read the stuff for fun. I may be totally botching it, so my apologies to anyone who might be listening. Please don't quote me in your term paper. But the example that I heard recently was like...
Footnote, Laura Heywood.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. She said it was true. The example I heard is like, if all the rabbits who got killed by foxes were the only ones who had the memory that foxes kill rabbits, then no future generations would ever avoid foxes. But if a rabbit sees its sister get mauled by a fox, then something genetically turns on that it passes to the next generation about the trauma of seeing the other rabbit get eaten by the fox. And that we do, in some ways, it's almost like a scientific version of past lives. It's like we do maybe scientifically, physically carry the traumas of the people who birthed us and the people who birthed them.
Well,
and I've been working on this in therapy and stuff, and like imagining pasts from people generations ago that might contribute to some of my personality traits, and it's fascinating, and it's useful even if it's imaginary, or even if it's not an exact science. The idea that we carry those things that need to be reconciled within ourselves has been useful and fascinating to me.
I think even taking it beyond that, like we know that energy, it cannot be created or destroyed. All the energy that ever was and ever will be exists right now. So when we part this mortal coil that we have, the energy that is us goes somewhere else. Like, I know I've been a tree. And so when multiple people say they, were Cleopatra or they were something, why couldn't a million people have shared in the DNA that was Cleopatra, and so they are sharing in that. I believe that. I like have a knowing of that kind of thing.
Ugh, you guys, this conversation did not go at all the way that I thought it was going to, and I'm obsessed with that. This is the first time in my 20-year career of being a broadcaster that I have had creative control over who I bring in and what I talk about, and whether or not I play the funny sound effects. The one thing that is hard and fast is that we have to end at a certain time.
Got it.
We have about 7 minutes left, but I just want to thank you all for your openness and telling your stories and your backgrounds and getting into this. This really feels like, Tonya and I are friends. You guys are all friends, but the two of you, Janet and Mary, I'm meeting for the first time.
Jasmine.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Where did Janet come from?
Janet, damn it. It's
Damn
from
it,
that
Janet.
play.
Oh
Damn
my
it,
God.
Janet.
Damn it, sorry, Jasmine and Mary. Well, look, again, nobody has to be perfect on this show. And while I, especially after hearing that story, really want to honor and respect your name, I love that we got to sit here and have a genuine conversation, and that other people are have the option of listening in and of it doesn't have to be like, Tonya, what was it like being in Jelly's Last Jam? Or, it didn't have to be, it could have been and would have been equally great if it was a fangirl show. But we got to have conversations that show multi-dimensions about all of us, which in a way brings it back to the idea of truth and reconciliation, and that none of us has to be what everybody's always thought that we were.
We aren't.
Exactly. Exactly.
We're so much more. I was at it was actually a Time's Up Now 50/50 initiative, and Jill Soloway was talking about her pronoun, her gender pronoun. And she, gosh, I can't even remember what it is because it's something unusual. And she said, I don't mind if you call me she, because hers is they, them, their. She said, I don't mind if you call me she, but if you use they, she says, I feel like you actually see me. She said, I don't want to be limited by what it is to be female, and I don't want to be limited by what it is to be male. I've got some of all of that, and I left that, and I was like, yeah, I don't want to be limited by what it is to be female or what it is to be male. And so I was like, I want to be they, and I was like, but I don't want to feel like I'm misappropriating people who, identify as non-binary because they feel that biologically. She said she thought that was okay, so I decided my pronoun is D for diva.
Yes.
When Ty was here, Ty Defoe, and we were talking about what it means to be two-spirit, we were talking about pronouns, and one of his preferred pronouns is we. And I was like, I've gotten they in my grammar nerd brain. I've gotten to a point where I can say singular they without. It's not a cringe because of the idea of non-binariness. It's the idea of having been a student of grammar. It's the same as like I used to put two spaces after a period when I was typing, and that's no longer the thing. And it's taken me forever to retrain. No,
it's not one. They're hard line.
No, that was a typewriter. That was a
that a
typewriter
thing?
issue.
Oh.
That's what you used to put two.
No, was that?
That was a thing.
That was a thing.
Yeah, that was a
Because
grammatical thing.
with typewriters and we don't have enough time to get into all of it. But apparently, just as a little aside, with the two spaces after a period thing, this is one way that teachers and professors are being able to tell when essays are plagiarized or when their parents wrote them, because the parents or the previous generation's essays that people are turning in have the two spaces that is outdated, but when kids write them themselves, there's only one space after the period.
Okay.
Which I think is like such fantastic detective work. Anyway, so when I was like, okay, Ty, if your pronoun is we, and he also uses he and they and we, and I was like, it doesn't make sense if I go, we are from Wisconsin, because I'm not from Wisconsin. But if I say we are an artist, that gives me chills, because I might not self-identify as an artist, but when I address Ty and say we are an artist, I'm reminded of my own potential and the fact that we are all one big, more than a species. It's almost like we're one organism, and maybe we are all a we. And if Tonya was a tree, then maybe I should say we were a tree, because and it's gotten my brain thinking all of these things that are this intersection I'm fascinated by, that is both mystical and totally scientific.
And what I like is I want to start switching the verb with it so that it goes, We is a tree.
Oh.
We is a tree.
I love it.
He is a tree.
Yes, I was thinking the same thing, and I was like, would you put the singular with?
I was thinking we is a tree. Like if I wanted to go singularly, we is a tree.
Yeah, or they is.
They is a tree.
Yeah. Oh man,
We're
my
going
grammar.
nerds.
I'm gonna like toss and turn. I will get there because this is the bottom line. No amount of discomfort that I can have over grammar will ever match the discomfort of somebody who has been misgendered their whole life.
Yes.
And I feel like our willingness to step into the river of discomfort is what solidarity looks like.
I'm just writing down river of discomfort is what solidarity looks like.
No,
that is so beautiful.
I think that's huge. And I do it all the time on purpose. Like I see someone, they're interesting looking. I want to know more. I'm trying to connect with them. And I decide to connect around the first thing that got me is like, wow, you're so exotic looking. I don't want to say that word, but I'm like, okay, I'm about to put my foot in my mouth. What's your ancestry? Because where are you from? You're going to usually get America.
As you
right?
Yeah. As you should, I think. If somebody says, where are you from? You should say Brooklyn or whatever.
Right, exactly. But I do that because then you get a story, and you get a story beyond the surface stories that it's so easy to just have surface communications with people. And with these devices, you don't have to have any communications with people.
Okay, we are wrapping up. First of all, again, thank you so much to the three of you, Jasmine, Mary, and Tonya, for being here. I want everyone to check out Truth and Reconciliation of Women, the Heal Me Too Fest. HealMeTooFest.com is the website where you can find all of that stuff. And you can follow Tonya at Tonya Pinkins on Twitter and at Diva Divu on Instagram. I also want to say, for those of you listening on the free podcast version, I would love for you to invest the $6.95 a month to subscribe. That's the only way that this show is going to be able to keep going. The free version is my gift to you. The $6.95 a month that you can subscribe is going to allow me to continue to do this and to have conversations like this that are weird and challenging and maybe not what you expected, but unlike anything else that's going on in radio or podcasting that I know of. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and also check out the other shows that DNR Studios produces, Derek and Romaine, The Taylor Strecker Show. You can find all my past interviews on lauraheywoodmedia.com. Follow me on social media at BroadwayGirlNYC, although, of course, that is not my full identity. And tell your friends about the show, too. # Laura Heywood Interviews. Tonya, Mary, Jasmine, it has been my true honor to have you here today. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you.
Oh, my goodness.
We got to
so
take a picture before we
fun.
get out of here. All four of us here, now that all four of us are here. But
We definitely will do that. And for those of you listening on the live player, Anxiety is coming up, which is an incredible talk show about gossip and anxiety and mental health. It's hosted by my friend Donnie, and it's fantastic. Thank you again for being here. This is Laura Heywood, and this has been Laura Heywood Interviews.
3 minutes to showtime.